Hi everybody, it's Laura from Sewist Abroad, and we are on day number 4 of our Rainbow Hexie quilt along. So yesterday we created our quilt sandwich, and we got talking about quilting and how that we want our design to look. And today we are going to start tackling the task of binding the quilt. But before we do that, we are going to attach, let me get the back of my quilt here so I can show you. We are going to attach little pockets onto the corners, so that way if you want to hang your quilt using a dowel, you will have pockets for that. And then we are going to attach our binding to our quilt, and that is going to be either on the front or the back, depending on the finishing style that you choose. We will go through that tomorrow, but for today, binding and hanging pockets. I'm sure there's a fancier name. I just don't know it, so I call them hanging pockets. Whatever. All right, let's get started. Okay, so today we are going to talk about squaring up our quilt and getting our bias binding on there and these little things. Okay, so first, squaring up your quilt. It is exactly the way that it sounds. We are going to trim our edges so that way everything is even and straight. Now, we started with a 20 by 20 quilt topper and a 24 by 24 quilt backing. So this gives us a few options when it comes down to trimming about what size that you want your quilt to be. So on my pastel rainbow quilt, this one, I'm sorry you can't see it all at once, but either way, I trimmed this one down to 18 by 18 inches, which I think is a really good size for a wall, like a mini wall quilt. It also makes really great size for pillow shams. This one, I wanted to go, because I arranged my Hexies a little different. They're all in straight lines. I wanted a rectangle. So this one is actually trimmed down to 19 by 17 inches. So 17 inches wide, 19 inches long. So you just want to use your rotary cutter and your ruler and your cutting mat and just make nice, clean and straight cuts on your sides. So once you have this all done, I don't know if you can see it all, your quilt is squared. Now we get to bias the binding. I shouldn't call it bias because I actually don't cut my binding on the bias. You can. I've just never really felt the need to, because I always do straight lines, like, you know, crisp edged quilts. If you were doing a round quilt, then you would want to cut it on the bias because it gives you more give, right? Like you can curve it a little bit better. But this is just straight grain binding. So in the supply list, I told you to cut strips that were 2.5 inches wide, right? So that's what this is. So we're going to start with that. Then we're going to take those strips and we are going to sew them together. I do like to sew mine on a bias though, like do my seams here on a bias. I think you can see it there. The way that we are going to do that, let me get out 2 pieces of contrasting binding here so that way we can see it a little bit better. Okay, these are from old projects. I save everything because you never know when you're gonna need it. I can't think of a sewist that doesn't do that. I don't know. So in order to attach our binding strips together, we are going to take them and place them like this. These are 2 different sizes, so this is just for show. And then what we are going to do, if you were really cautious, you could draw a line on the 45 and sew along that line. I eyeball it. So you always want to work from the outside in. So we're going to start sewing on the outside, sew a 45 across the pieces that meet up together. See, this is one on top of the other. In to the bottom. Let me get this out of the way. And what that is going to do is join your fabrics like this. Trim your seam allowance down to 1/4 inch and press open. When I'm doing patchwork, I actually always press to one side because I feel that that makes stronger seams. But when I'm doing my binding, I do like to press it open, and that's so that way it lays flatter. Okay, so once we have them all sewn together, the seams are pressed open, we are going to fold it in half and we're going to iron it. We're going to press it really nice. So now, see that? You're going to have 1.25 inch wide binding strip. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to attach the binding and our hanging pockets all at the same time. So first thing that you want to do is figure out what the top of your quilt is. And I think this right here is going to be my top. Now, those squares that we had cut out, I pressed those in half, so now they're these neat little triangles. And I'm going to line them up in my corners. So I'm just going to put this one here and I'm going to clip that right in. There we go, there's one. And this is a great way to use up scraps too, because this is the back of your quilt and nobody's ever going to see it. So if you have some like neon orange fabric that you don't know what you're going to do with, now's the time to use it. There we go. So these are attached. And what this is going to do is, see, like when these are all done, here, I'll show you this one. These were just little extra patchwork squares that I had from my popsicle quilt, and I used them on this one. And if you wanted to hang your quilt using a dowel, you would just slide your dowel into these, and then that would hold your quilt up. So they're just little hanging pockets. So there, that's on there. These ones are a little bit bigger. Now, when it comes to binding, I'm going to show you one way to attach it to the quilt. If you are interested in hand sewing your binding, like hand finishing your binding, you are going to want to sew your binding to the very front of your quilt. So this is the front of my quilt. Okay. So if I was going to hand sew it or hand finish it, I would be sewing this to the front of my quilt, because I like to machine finish my binding. Again, instant gratification. We're on the home stretch here, people, so like at this point I get a little impatient. We're gonna attach it to the back of the quilt. I like to start at the bottom. Okay, and when I start, I leave myself a good 12 inches of slack. And I'm going to start in the middle right here, maybe right here. And I'm going to start just pinning a few pieces just to get me going, right? And so I'm going to take this to the machine. I'm not going to show you like actual sewing because I think you can figure that part out. We are going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way up here. We're going to tick, 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 all the way along, and then we're going to stop. When we get a 1/4 inch from this side right here, you stop. I like to then sew off the quilt, but I have seen some people just stop and cut their thread and call it a day. Because this next step that we're going to do, we are going to create our miter corner. And the way I do this, so we're going to stop sewing at a 1/4 inch, right? So then we're going to take our binding and we're going to go up to the sky. We're going to fold it up to the sky. Look at that nice that mitered corner that you're getting right there. And then we're going to fold it down to the ground. See? You know that you've done it right when your binding is flush on this side and it's nice and straight and flush on this side. And here too, okay? So this corner should now be a square. And then you're going to start a 1/4 inch from the top, and you're going to sew all the way down to the next edge, right? So we're going to go tick, 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 tick. We're sewing. That's my sewing sound. Tick, 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 tick. Let me just pin this here. So all the way over top your pocket, tick, 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 tick. And then I'm gonna stop. 1/4 inch from that side, remember? And we are going to then fold up to the sky. And you're gonna get that nice 45-degree miter. And then we're gonna fold down to the ground, right? We're gonna make sure that this is flush, and this is flush, and this is flush. And then we're gonna keep sewing all the way to the other corner. Ready? Tick, 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 tick. Pause, shift, whoop. Tick, 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 tick. Stop. We are gonna stop 1/4 inch from this side, right? We're gonna fold our binding up to the sky. We got that nice 45, and then fold it down to the ground. Remember, flush, flush, flush. And then we're gonna keep sewing. Tick, 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 tick. Okay, we're gonna stop 1/4 inch, right from this edge, right? And we're gonna fold up to the sky. Nice 45-degree angle right there. And then can you guess? We're gonna down to the ground. Okay? Flush, flush, flush. And then we're gonna keep going. Tick, 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 tick. You're like, oh, okay. Here we are. This is our last edge, right? So we are gonna stop. Boom. I'm gonna give myself that much space. How much space is that? Right, that's 5 inches. I'm gonna give myself 5 inches here. And then remember, I have 12 inches here. Of this. And this is how I join my bias, or not my bias, I have to stop saying that. This is how I join my binding, so that way it's seamless. Okay, we're gonna take this and flip it up. So we've opened up our binding and we flipped it up. And here's the binding from the other side. And I want to overlap it by about 1 inch. So that brings me to right here. If you want, you can mark it. Put a little mark right there, okay? I don't have a pen on me, so I'm just gonna remember that polka dot. Then I'm gonna open it. See, this is my line of polka dots that I said that I wanted to overlap at. I'm gonna open it, so it's wide, and I'm gonna turn it, and I'm gonna line up that polka dot line, or if you had your marker, with the top of the binding from my left side. And then I'm gonna sew this, I'm gonna sew the 45 across, again, going from the outside to the bottom. And then when I attach that, it should fit. It should be a seamless fit, and then I can trim my fabric. So this is what I'm gonna do. I am going to get my binding on, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's all complete, or at least when it's tacked on the one way. Maybe what I'll do is I'll stop before I get to this point so I can show you what it looks like. Okay, so let's get this binding attached to the quilt, just like that. Okay, and just like that, we have the binding attached to the quilt. So I got my mitered corners right here. And we're at the point where we want to join the binding together, so that way we get a seamless finish. So I am just going to lay out my pieces here, and I am going to, I want to give myself a little bit of space from where I started stitching, because I'm going to need it to maneuver. And I want to make sure that it overlaps about 2 inches. So if I give myself 3 inches of working space, okay? And then I'm gonna add my 2 inches for overlap. I'm right here, right? Okay, and the same thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure on my other piece. I'm gonna put a mark there too, so that way I know where they meet up, where I want them to meet up, I should say. Now I'm gonna open up both of my bindings right here. See? Okay. And then I'm going to take, see my mark is right here. I'm going to take this piece And I'm gonna make it so that way the right sides are together. And I'm gonna mark, or I'm gonna put this piece with the mark flush with the edge on this part of my binding. Okay, I know this looks really awkward, and it does take some finesse, some finagling, but the result is worth it. I find. Anyways, it took me a few quilts in to kind of get my process down pat. Okay, there they are. See how they're on top of each other? We're ready to sew them together. So we're gonna sew a 45, just like what we did when we were joining our pieces together, from the outside to the bottom. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like, okay? Okay, so I've sewn those together, see, here. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna trim these down to a 1/4 seam allowance here. So I'm just gonna, I love these polka dots because they're whimsy, but also because all the polka dots are in a straight line, so it makes it really easy to sew or to cut straight lines. I'm just gonna finger press this open so that way you can see. Here, give it a nice little tuggy tug, and look, it's perfect. So all you have to do now is just sew your binding onto it with your 1/4 seam allowance, and look, it's seamless. Like, nobody's gonna know where your binding starts and where your binding ends. So that's how I like to get my binding onto my quilt. And what I'll do after I'm done sewing and getting ready for the next video is, once this is all sewn on, what I want you to do is to press, take an iron and press your binding here away from your quilt. So we're going to open it all up, and I want you to press this down. So this should be flat when we get ready for tomorrow. Okay, and when you come down to your edges here, we're going to do it like this. So we're going to press one edge. Ooh. You can do it like that, and then you're going to get your iron right in there, and see, look, it's already forming a perfect, I don't know if you can see it right there, it's already forming a miter here. So you're going to press that right open, okay? And then we will get ready. Look at the pockets, see how, look how they're all in there. Everything's just nice and tidy and seamless. And that will be getting ready for the next step. So we're going to press all that open. I did realize that at the beginning I didn't talk about measuring out your binding. So if you're going to be making a quilt of your own and you're like, well, Laura, you just told me how much to cut, like what if I want to do this on my own? Well, it's actually really easy. So all you have to do is add up your 4 sides, right, the length of your 4 sides. That's how much you need, and I like to add in anywhere from 12 to 18 inches extra, so that way I have room to finesse or room for mistakes. Really, there isn't like a fancy formula, but that's just my math. That's the way I do it. So I add up all of my lengths and I add on a foot to 1.5 feet. So that's it. Your binding is attached. If you want to hand finish tomorrow, you're going to do all the same steps, except that you are going to be sewing, machine sewing your binding onto the front of your quilt. And if you're machine finishing like me, then you are going to be doing it on the back, just the way that we did it here. So again, if you have any questions or you're hung up on any steps, please let me know. Leave a message or a comment here, and I will do my best to walk you through it. Okay, thanks very much. And guys, the next step, and we're done. We're done. That's so amazing. Okay, I will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.